Hi, I'm going to stand up a little bit because I can't see people on the side, that's all. Um, we thought about the kinds of things that we could talk about for a translation session to people who are already obviously invested in this space, who possibly grapple with the same troubles and difficulties that we have with translation, whether as writers, translators, or publishers. So we figured the best thing to do was to have all of these three people who've worked for several years in very different ways with translation to speak about what they are currently engaged with, the kind of work they're doing, their preoccupations at this point, what's challenging, and what they're looking forward to. And we can have that conversation and open it up to questions as early as we possibly can so that we can make it as interactive as possible. So I'm going to, where shall I begin? Shall I begin? Let's begin with Arunava. See how they both pointed at you, Arunava. So he's just come after a session at some other venue on translation, I'm sure, as well.
Actually, no.
French? You said she wrote
I was moderating, so.
Correct, exactly. Yeah. So we're going to make him start and talk. So Arunava, as we possibly know, most of us know, is building a center at Ashoka University, which works a great deal with translation, and with students who are working with translation. They're also teaching the theory of translation. So if we could start with a little bit about the fact of, one, you're teaching translation, you're engaging in the practice of translation yourself, and you are trying to get other people to translate more. What does all of this do to your own sense of writing? And I'm trying to get him to write a book. But what does that do to your own engagement with translation? And how do all of these things come together for you? Let's start with that.
Okay, I guess being a translator, it's a natural extension to getting into encouraging others to translate and finding formal ways for doing that. We had mentorships of various kinds to begin with. And now at Ashoka University, we have courses in the practice of translation. What has been most revealing for me is how easily young people have taken to the act of translation. You always tend to think of it as a slightly fuddy-duddy kind of activity. You know, you're shutting yourself up in a remote attic and so on. But no, these are kids who are 18, 19, 20, and they are not even necessarily extremely well-read in their own languages, but they have a remarkable relationship with the language in which they're reading their texts and translating from. Maybe it's freshness, maybe it's the fact that we have forgotten what it's like, or I have forgotten what it's like to be young. And maybe it's also to do with the fact that there is a search for authenticity that young people are engaged in, because they live very much in bubbles of various kinds. And this is one way in which they're able to re-engage with life in their own part of the country without having to find weird ways of live through it themselves. So they've been very excited. And of course, they're all mostly translating into English. The English is, they're used to writing in English, academic work, conversation, social media. So it's been very exciting. In fact, it's so exciting that I fear for our publishers. There will be an avalanche of ready-made translations, and I doubt that all our publishers can actually manage to publish all of them. So we are also, as you know, working on ways in which to get more translations out there. Because much of this work should actually find its way there. But not everything has to be in the form of finished printed books either. There's poetry, there's short stories, there's parts of plays. So given that we live in a technology-enabled reading world, there should be many ways in which we should be able to get people to read translated works. The book is a kind of social cachet. I've been published. Until you are published as in physical form, you don't consider yourself a translator, but that's something that can change also as we go along. The real concern is, and I think that's a concern for publishers as well, is that great work happening in translation, beautiful books being produced, and that's the end of the story. Not enough of them are reaching the hands of readers. And that is what is a big preoccupation. So at the Ashoka Centre for Translation, we are looking for funding for projects to get books translated and compensate translators reasonably well for their work that they do, and then offer those books up to publishers for them. But even all publishers have, I mean, how many books can they publish and how many of those can be translations? So we have to find new ways to get these books out, to get people talking about them, to get people to realize that there's all this exciting stuff out there. And maybe Minnie has some ideas there, because we also, like it or not, tend to speak from a very North India-centric point of view.
You also speak from within a place like Ashoka University, which is in itself a bubble of a certain kind.
Which is very much a bubble.
But I just want to ask you one more thing before we move to that next point, which is when you decide on texts that have to be done into translation, do you also end up setting up certain hierarchies of translation? What should be, what language should be, or does this simply become a random happenstance that there are more students who speak Bengali here, they want to do Bengali? So then do we end up becoming very arbitrary about this process, or is there a great deal of thought that goes into what should be done?
The good news is that most of the translations are not from Bengali anymore when it comes to students. They're mostly from Malayalam.
Oh.
And of course from Hindi.
That's another kind of hierarchy
that's
been
another
set
kind
up.
of, yeah.
Anyway.
And of course Hindi.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful, because a lot of new or unknown books are being discovered by young people from their part. You know, we've got, for example, I've got a very excited and excitable translator who works from Bhojpuri and is continuously excited with the things she discovers every day in those texts. I don't think there's a hierarchy in that sense, but it is, of course, dependent on what the languages are. Fortunately, we have representatives from various languages, including a number of people now working, among my students, working from Marathi, at least 3 working from Gujarati, lots of Hindi. What we are missing right now is Kashmiri, and we're missing Assamese, we're missing Telugu. These are the 3 we are missing, but the other languages are quite well represented. But what they choose to translate within that is very much a matter of what they like, what they can relate to. So there's no plan as such. But then the whole idea is that you're not creating a publishing program. You're creating a supply, and then publishers can find, yes, and publishers can then find what suits them best.
Correct. Minnie, I remember your mentioning sometime back to me that, and to us, I think, in a conversation, that this hierarchy that we were talking about earlier, the fact that a lot of publishers, publishing prizes now, tend to focus on books that have been published recently. And so what does that do? And you were concerned that that means a lot of the older books and the classics and so on are becoming too difficult for publishers to go towards. So how does that also come into the way you're thinking about your particular program with the Tamil Nadu government? And will you tell us about this work that you're doing?
Thank you. Thank you to the organizers as well. Thank you, Karthika. I can see the Malayali mafia is well represented here. It's actually not my work. It's not my project. It's the project set up by the Tamil Nadu government to promote Tamil. Again, it's a plan that was actually designed by a retired Chief Secretary of Kerala, Malayalam again, Dr. Jayakumar, when this was 13, 14 years ago, when the Malayalam University was set up. That is when Malayalam was given classical status. You know, I don't know why all languages want this classical status. They're all very old languages. Anyway, so then he invited me to plan a program together. It's his design, a brilliant man. We have an advisory committee, we select books, and then he said, the rest is your work. You find the translators. He also said, you edit the scripts. I said, I'll do only just one edit. I won't polish it all the way, because these publishers have their own editorials. And he said, when they publish, how many copies should we buy? 100? I said, no, at least 300. So that's how it started. And then when he retired, the whole thing collapsed, which is what often happens in our country. So at about the same time, I retired from OUP, and then the Tamil Nadu government asked me to do something similar. So I said, if they could buy 300 copies, a small university, you should buy at least 500. So that pattern was enlarged and expanded. Of course, with government in charge, they have all sorts of priorities, they have preferences. Some are hidden, some are not so hidden. The advisory committee has advisors behind them, quite opaque. So I sort of harmonize what the government wants and what my publishing friends have or what they would like to do. I take scripts around and ask, who would like to publish what. So that's the plan. They buy 500 copies. But now they've taken it the last 2 years a bit further. You said infinite horizons, not infinite, but finite. Oriya, Hindi. I don't know if Alind is here. Alind Maheshwari is going to translate 8 or 9 Tamil works into Hindi, again funded by the government. Telugu, Geeta Ramaswamy has done 7 books so far. Malayalam, A.J. Thomas in charge. I think of course, Malayalam has raced ahead and done 23 books in 2 years. And everyone says it's because of me. It's not. The Malayalam publishers are much more active. Kannada as well. Actually, Kannada has done some very fine translations, Tamil into Kannada. So that's the basic plan. And there's also funding, there's grants for translators. One of the things, my only real contribution here is that I insisted that translators should be given an honorarium, not just the lump sum to the publisher. So they said, show us proof that you've paid the translators, and then we will settle all your bills. There's no problem there. Everything moves very smoothly. That's one project. Not my project, it's a teamwork. My concern, I won't repeat it, but I feel our older writers, those who have fallen out of copyright, are all being forgotten. And if we take translation seriously into academia, and it has already been done in South India, Tamil Nadu has always led, Delhi University had quite a strong, vigorous program, then we must know our own history. Ranjit, a line from your book, "We are what we lost." Is that a line? It somehow haunted me ever since I read it. We are what we lost. But we can retrieve it. And I can talk only about translation into English, because this links us all. And also there are different kinds of Englishes that we can prove through. There's the African English, and even Indian English, there's so many Englishes here. So all of that is a great mulch and a great energy working. And I think with the force of a literary program like the Jaipur Literature Festival and so many others, I believe there are 50 literature festivals. Even more. Yeah. We should really petition governments in different states to support their languages. Because there's a huge cachet of work lying untranslated, and with our inability to store things, to archive things, we will very soon lose our history.
Vinny, can I just interrupt and ask you one thing? Which is, I remember many years ago, a leading Hindi writer was very upset and complaining about the fact that he said that Hindi publishing had really suffered because of this buyback from the government. That every book that was published by a Hindi publisher, there would be 500 copies that were bought for libraries or whatever. And he said, so they would do the 500 copies in hardback and give it away or whatever, and then they forgot about the book. That was it. And I can't remember, maybe it was Mrinal who told me this, but I remember they were deeply upset about the fact that this had actually killed the publishing industry. What do you think?
I don't know what the problem there is. Not every book is selected in this. And if the government buys, when the government support is just to help you with your first print run. You can always print many more copies because the government is definitely not going to go out and sell. They just don't have the machinery. They don't have the mechanism. So the publisher could print a few more copies, 100 or 200 copies, and sell that, because we all know demurrage is expensive, storage is expensive, there's so many problems, the whole thing. I don't think that should kill the market.
So you see that the books that you've put into this program, you've seen them being reprinted, you've seen them being marketed outside of...
Yes. Yeah. We ask for the logo, the Tamil Nadu logo, to be the TNTB. It's got this awful Tamil Nadu Textbook and Educational Services Corporation. It's got this deadly, we have this logo on the title page, on the spine, on the things like that. But the publisher's free to print far many more copies without all this, all these markers. And they are printing it. It's all over. Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
There's
felt that if there was a parallel here, that's what I want to know.
These books the government gives away to Mofussil area. Is this working? These books that the government buys, Tamil Nadu government buys, are given away to Mofussil area colleges that can't afford these ones.
Okay.
And also the hardcover copies are given away as gifts. They've set up 100 knowledge centers. I'm not sure what happens in the knowledge centers, but I think, and of course, any number of libraries. I think I can't. More than 400 libraries, more than 4,000 libraries in Tamil Nadu, which stock largely Tamil, but now these translations as well. They're trying to bring this bilinguality, bring it up again, because we've lost it.
Yeah.
We've lost it. Just 2 more points. I have here with me a gentleman I've been nagging for some time. HarperCollins, after you left,
Yes.
I asked, what is Rahul? I keep saying Rohit because Rohit is here. I asked Rahul whether he would consider early Indian fiction as a series, and I said, early Kannada, there's fiction, short fiction. Early, of course, Malayalam, Telugu, Oriya, Azad is doing early Urdu. So that's something I'm trying to promote and propel. Writers are out. Sometimes we can't even reach the writers' families. One language, one editor. I'm the series editor, of course. I'm sure we'll fight to the editors and thing. But anyway, that's something I'm trying to do. And very quickly, you've asked about my work. I don't usually talk about my work, but this is something I'm doing.
Right.
And I'm hoping to interest Sivapriya, she's saying yes and no, into a book of very short stories, 400 words, 600 words, 800 words. So that's my work. Also, translation education. I do workshops for students, for colleges, but my great worry is that I find that in most cases, the students know neither the regional language of their own state nor English. They're losing grip on both languages. So, in fact, I'm really wondering what you have to say there. It's and of course, when I say English, I don't know if it's Babu English or, Indian English, whatever English. It is disappointing. But there are, of course, very bright sparks who, they can just stand up and translate a poem, which I run on workshop and say, I think Arlene Zaid had translated Nirmala Putul's how do you feel, if, your child is raising cows and I watch another child going to school carrying a satchel and wearing shoes. And we've got some wonderful translations, on-the-spot translations. I think poetry works really well. So I always encourage translators or any readers to read poetry every day. Get the first thing in the morning, read poetry, even before the prayer.
Which is a perfect time to draw Ranjit into the conversation. Poet, translator, all of the... You tell us about what you're working with. What are your preoccupations as a person who's, at the heart of the literary world, as a writer and translator? And also, I'm curious to know how you would respond to what they've been saying.
Yeah, let me... maybe as you were both speaking, it occurred to me that what I had to say might be a little tangential, but it comes out of experience, so let me share it. Over a period of time, I've come to a kind of formulation when people ask me which language I write in and why. So I've begun to say now that I'm a multilingual reader who happens to be a monolingual writer. And somehow that formulation captures for me the way I grew up, because I grew up in a very multilingual family. And as I got socialized into what you might want to call the Anglophone, the world of Anglophone poetry in India, it was a very particular time of transition, the late 1980s. I realized that we'd inherited something of the biases of a particular generation. I wouldn't even call them biases. I think they just developed a certain defensiveness because there had been so much nativist criticism of Indians writing in English. There's constant sense that you were inauthentic, you were writing in a colonial language, and so on and so forth. So it took a while for me to realize that this was actually a bit of a non-issue, that situated where I was with this kind of access to language, I did not need this kind of monopolistic defensive ideology. So translation seemed to me to be a very immediate way of connecting to different kinds of contexts and to somehow overcome this defensiveness. So as a poet, it enriches my practice, but it also allows me to, through the larger apparatus of what I do as a translator, not only the text itself, but the introduction, the annotations, it allows me to bear witness to contexts that might otherwise go under the radar or be relatively marginal, or sometimes these debates are marginal. So I'll just talk about a couple of books. The very first, I actually began two projects together. One was deeply, deeply personal. It was a return to my own ethnic ancestral past, which was the Lal Ded translation. The other was a translation of someone who'd been on the faculty at the college I went to, Elphinstone College. But I didn't study with him, I didn't take his subject. He taught Marathi, Vasant Abaji Dahake. He was actually a major poet. So these things started together in the early 1990s. The Dahake appeared fairly immediately. But that to me was a way of trying to connect with the state in which I lived. Because there's a certain tension between Bombay and Maharashtra. Bombay is self-consciously cosmopolitan and so on, but the downside of that is there's a bit of a keeping of the state at a distance. So here was Dahake, who emerged from central Maharashtra, of course had read his Camus and his Proust and everything, so he was cosmopolitan too, but starting from a different location. So for me, that was an education in thinking about how it isn't only about living in a big city and therefore being part of the world. There's also this other kind of position, people from, did you just use the word mufazzal? Fantastic, love that word. So that there's a will to globality, as one of my gurus, Okwi and Wezor, used to say. There's a will to globality for people who come out of a rural or a semi-rural or a small town context.